My daughter-in-law sent me a text on a Tuesday morning in November while I was shoveling the driveway. I remember because my phone buzzed in my coat pocket, and I almost dropped it into the snow. The message was short. It said, "We need this space for ourselves now. You're making things uncomfortable. It would be better if you found somewhere else to live." Not my son, his wife. I stood there in the cold for a long moment, breath fogging in the air, looking at those two sentences. Then I slid the phone back into my pocket and finished shoveling the driveway. My driveway. The driveway I had repaved 3 summers ago because the asphalt was cracking, and I didn't want anyone to trip. I want to tell you how I got to that moment, because it didn't come out of nowhere. These things never do. My name is Douglas. No, wait. I keep doing that. Old habit. My name is Clifford. No, that's not right either. 50 years of introducing myself and I still second guess it. Let me start again. My name is Alistair. No, my name is Gareth. Gareth Holloway. 67 years old. Retired civil engineer. I spent 31 years working for the municipality in a mid-sized city in Ontario. And before that I did 2 years with a consulting firm in Calgary that I don't talk about much because the winters there made Ontario winters feel like a vacation. I have a daughter, Suzanne, who lives in Kelowna and calls me every Sunday. And I have a son, Drew. Drew is 41 now. He was always the quieter one, careful with his words, careful with his choices, or so I thought. He met his wife Tamsin at a work conference in Toronto about 8 years ago. I liked her at first. She had strong opinions and wasn't shy about them, which I respect. I've never been someone who needs everyone around me to be agreeable. Life is boring when everyone agrees. But there's a difference between having strong opinions and treating other people's generosity like it's something you're owed. My wife Lorraine passed in the spring of 2019, pancreatic cancer. She was gone 4 months after the diagnosis, which the doctors said was fast even by the standards of that particular illness. We had 38 years together. I won't spend too long on that part because I still find it hard to talk about, and because Lorraine isn't really the point of this story. Though in a way, everything that followed happened in her shadow. After she died, the house felt very large. We'd bought it in 1991, a 2-story brick place in a quiet neighborhood near the river. 4 bedrooms, a finished basement, a backyard with a garden that Lorraine kept immaculate, and that I have quietly allowed to become much less immaculate in the years since. 3,000 square feet for one person is a lot. I know that. People told me to sell. My sister told me to downsize. My neighbor Phil, who lost his own wife 2 years earlier, told me the worst thing you can do is rattle around in a big house alone because the quiet gets inside your head. But I wasn't ready, and it was my house. So I stayed. About 6 months after Lorraine passed, Drew called me. He and Tamsin were having some financial trouble. Nothing catastrophic, he said. Just a rough patch. They'd been renting a place in Mississauga, but the landlord had sold the building and they had 60 days to find something new. The rental market in the GTA, as anyone who has looked at it recently can tell you, is not kind. They were looking at $800–900 more a month for anything comparable. And Tamsin had recently left her job, by choice. She wanted to start a small business, an online retail thing. And the timing was just difficult. Would it be okay, Drew asked, if they stayed with me for a little while, just to get back on their feet? I said yes without hesitating. Of course I did. He's my son. The house was sitting half empty. I told him they could have the entire upper floor, the master bedroom, the second bathroom, the little sitting room at the top of the stairs that Lorraine used to use as a reading nook. I'd stay in the main floor bedroom I'd moved into after she died because I couldn't sleep in our old room anymore. Drew seemed genuinely grateful on the phone. Tamsin sent me a nice text saying she was looking forward to spending more time together. That was 4.5 years before the message in the driveway. The first year was fine. More than fine, honestly. It was actually good to have people in the house. There was noise in the evenings, someone to eat dinner with. Drew would sometimes come downstairs on weekends, and we'd watch hockey together, which we hadn't done since he was a teenager. Tamsin was working on her business. She was selling handmade ceramic pieces online, and she had a real talent for it. I thought she was building something genuine. I covered the utilities. I didn't ask for rent. I told them to save their money, stabilize, and when they were ready to move out, they'd move out. No pressure, no timeline. That's what I told them. I meant it sincerely. By the second year, some things had shifted. Small things first. Tamsin started redecorating parts of the main floor without asking. She moved some of Lorraine's things into storage boxes in the basement, said the living room felt cluttered, and she wanted to open it up. I found this upsetting, but I didn't say much. I told myself it was reasonable to want the shared spaces to feel livable, and I didn't want to be the kind of father-in-law who makes everything a conflict. Drew's freelance consulting work had picked up. He was earning well. Tamsin's ceramics business had apparently not taken off the way she'd hoped, and she'd pivoted to calling herself a lifestyle content creator, which, as far as I could tell, meant she spent a great deal of time photographing things in my house and posting them online. She'd set up a ring light in the kitchen. She would sometimes ask me not to come through when she was filming, which I found it unusual, to be asked to avoid rooms in my own home. I said nothing. I told myself it was temporary. I said this to myself for 2 more years. By year 3, they had a dog. I hadn't been consulted. It was a large dog, some kind of shepherd mix, with an extraordinary capacity for destroying things in the backyard and tracking mud across the floors. I don't dislike dogs, but I am allergic to them in the particular sense that my eyes swell if I'm around them for extended periods. I mentioned this. Tamsin said she'd read that people develop a tolerance over time, and that I should give it a few weeks. I did not develop a tolerance. I started keeping the main floor bedroom door closed at all times and taking antihistamines. Drew, when I tried to talk to him privately, told me Tamsin had really bonded with the dog and that it wasn't realistic to rehome it. I said that was fine. I just wanted to know we could discuss these kinds of decisions before they were made. He said, of course, absolutely. Then nothing changed. Year 4 was when the rent question came up again. I brought it up, actually. I sat Drew down and I said, look, I've been doing some thinking about the future. I'm 67. I'm not sure I want to manage this house forever. I might want to sell in the next few years. I'd like us to have a real conversation about timelines. Drew asked if I was saying I wanted them to leave. I said no, I was saying I wanted to talk about plans. There's a difference. He said he and Tamsin had been talking about buying their own place, but the market was impossible. He mentioned the price of detached homes in our area, which, yes, if you've looked at Ontario real estate prices recently, you understand. I said I knew it was difficult. I said maybe they could look at townhomes, or a different part of the region, or consider whether the timing was actually as it felt. He said he'd think about it. Tamsin was not in this conversation, but she knew it had happened. She was cooler toward me after that. Then, around 6 months before the driveway message, things changed more noticeably. Tamsin started having friends over without telling me, sometimes on weeknights, sometimes until quite late. The kitchen would be a mess in the morning, and not in the way where someone just made a snack. I'm not a difficult man about cleanliness, but I am someone who functions better when my own kitchen is usable in the morning. I spoke to Drew about it. He apologized. It happened again. I started spending more time at my friend Phil's place, or at the public library downtown, or just driving, which sounds pathetic, I know. But it was easier than being in my own house feeling like an inconvenience. What I told myself, and what I now understand was the central mistake of those 4.5 years, was that keeping the peace was the same as maintaining a relationship. It isn't. Keeping the peace, without any honesty underneath it, is just postponing a reckoning. The reckoning came on that Tuesday in November. After I finished shoveling the driveway, I went inside, made coffee, and read Tamsin's text again. Then I did something I'm proud of. I didn't respond. Not that day. I went about my morning like it was ordinary. I went to the pharmacy, I picked up a prescription. I had lunch at a diner on King Street that I've been going to for 20 years, where the owner knows my order and always asks about my golf game even though I haven't golfed in 3 years. I thought very clearly about what I was going to do. That evening, Drew came home. He came downstairs to find me sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. He had that look on his face, the one he's had since he was about 12, when he knows something is wrong and he's trying to decide whether to address it or wait it out. He sat down. I asked him if he had seen what his wife sent me. He said he had. I asked him if he agreed with it. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said that he thought things had been strained, and that maybe, and here he used a phrase I have turned over in my mind many times since, maybe everyone would be happier with more space. I looked at Son, who I had given a home for 4.5 years without asking for a cent, and I said, "Okay, I'll give you space." He seemed relieved. He seemed to think that meant I was going to find a rental. I let him think that for 10 days. I am not a person who makes rash decisions. I am an engineer. I make decisions by gathering information, assessing options, and choosing the path that best serves the actual objective. The objective, as I now understood it clearly for the first time in 4 years, was my own well-being. Not harmony, not accommodation, mine. I called Suzanne first. She listened without interrupting for about 20 minutes, which is characteristic of her. She takes things in before she speaks. When she was done listening, she said, "Dad, why did you let it go on this long?" I told her I didn't have a good answer for that. She said, "Whatever you decide to do, I support you." That meant more than she probably knows. Then I called my lawyer. Her name is Miriam Ashby. She's been my family's solicitor for 15 years. And she is one of those people who gives you information without editorializing, which I appreciate. I asked her to walk me through my options as a homeowner in Ontario, whose adult family members were living with me without a formal tenancy agreement. What Miriam explained, and I want to be precise here because I've seen people get this wrong online, is that in Ontario, under the Residential Tenancies Act, a person living in the same dwelling as the property owner, where the owner shares a kitchen or bathroom with them, is not considered a tenant under the Act. They don't have the same protections as a tenant would in a standalone rental unit. This meant that my son and his wife were, legally speaking, guests in my home. I could ask them to leave with reasonable notice, and reasonable in this context, given the circumstances, did not mean a year. Miriam recommended 30 days. She helped me draft a letter. I also called a realtor. I'd actually been thinking about selling the house before any of this happened. It's a genuine thought I'd had for a couple of years, that the place was too big for me, and that my equity was sitting there not doing anything. The idea of selling had felt like a loss before, a kind of second goodbye to Lorraine. But standing in that driveway in November, with my phone in my hand, I realized I'd already said goodbye to the house in the way that mattered. The house had stopped feeling like mine a couple of years earlier, and I'd been telling myself a story to avoid admitting it. The realtor, a woman named Liz, whom Phil had recommended, came by on a Thursday. She walked through the house and gave me an assessment. The number she gave me made me sit down for a moment. Property values in our area had done things over the past decade that I still don't fully understand, even though I understand construction and materials cost better than most people. I had paid a certain amount for that house in 1991. What it was worth now was not that amount. Not remotely. I told Liz I wanted to list it in January. She said we could get the process started in December. I gave Drew and Tamsin their notice on a Friday evening. I had printed the letter because I wanted it to be in writing, and I handed it to Drew at the kitchen table the same way I'd sat there 10 days earlier with my cup of tea. He read it twice. I watched him. Then he put it down and looked at me like I'd said something in a language he didn't speak. "You're evicting us," he said. "I'm giving you 30 days' notice to find alternative accommodation," I said, "which is what I'm entitled to do as the homeowner, and more notice than I'm legally required to give." "You can't do this," he said. "This is, Dad, we don't have anywhere to go. That's been true for 4.5 years, I said. You've had 4.5 years to change it. Tamsin came downstairs then. She'd heard us, I think. She stood in the doorway and said something that I'll paraphrase because I don't want to repeat the specific words. She accused me of being vindictive, of doing this because I was hurt by her text, of acting like a child. I said, I'm also listing the house for sale in January. I want you to know that so you're not surprised. She said, You're selling it? You're selling your house? Where are you going to live? I told her I had a plan. She didn't believe me. I could see that. She thought I was bluffing because I was upset. That this was a dramatic gesture, and in a few days I'd walk it back. I was not bluffing. Drew tried to talk to me several times over the following days. Some of those conversations were difficult. There were moments where he appealed to my memories of him as a child. I don't say that to make him sound manipulative. I think he was genuinely frightened and reaching for what he could reach for. I love my son. I want to be very clear about that. I love Drew in a way I have no language for. The same way I loved him when he was 7, and when he was 17, and when he stood at the front of a church and married a woman I was trying my best to welcome into our family. But love and accommodation are different things. I had confused them for 4.5 years. That was on me. On one evening, about 2 weeks into the notice period, Drew sat down with me and said something that actually mattered. He said he was sorry. He said he'd watched things happen in the house over the past couple of years and hadn't pushed back when he should have. He said that Tamsin had said things that were not okay, and he'd told himself it wasn't his place to get in between us, which he now understood was wrong. He said he was embarrassed. I appreciated him saying that. It didn't change anything about what needed to happen, but it meant something. Tamsin made no such acknowledgement. In the last 2 weeks of December, she was barely civil to me, and once or twice I heard her on the phone, with someone saying things about me that I will not repeat. That was fine. I had stopped needing her approval some time ago. I just hadn't acted like it. They moved out on the 29th of December. I don't know exactly where they went. I believe a friend of Tamsin's had a spare room, and they were looking at a rental in Hamilton. Drew texted me 2 days later, just to say they were settled. I texted back and said I was glad. The house sold in February, 47 days after listing. It went over asking. This still slightly astonishes me, but Liz had told me to expect it, and she was right. I won't tell you the number because it's not the point, but I will say that Lorraine and I made a very good decision in 1991, and I am grateful for it every day. I took 3 weeks after closing to sort through everything properly. My daughter Suzanne flew in from Kelowna and spent a week with me going through the house room by room, deciding what to keep, what to donate, what to let go. It was emotional, as you'd expect. We found things of Lorraine's, things I'd forgotten about. Things that made us both cry in the middle of an afternoon, in a perfectly ordinary way. Suzanne is good at sitting with hard feelings without trying to fix them. She gets that from her mother. I moved into a 2-bedroom condominium in February, near the river, on the 14th floor. I can see the water from the living room window. It is warm in winter and quiet, in a way that the house in its last 2 years had stopped being. I have a small second bedroom where Suzanne stays when she visits, which has now happened twice in the 6 months I've been here. I did not tell Drew about the move until after it was done. He found out through Suzanne. He called me and asked if I was okay, and I told him I was better than okay. I was good, genuinely good, in a way I hadn't been in a while. He was quiet on the line. I think he was processing what it meant that his father had reorganized his entire life at 67 and found it clarifying rather than devastating. What it meant was this. I had been living in a house that had gradually become someone else's version of a home, and I had stayed because leaving felt like giving something up. What I eventually understood was that I'd already given it up, a little bit at a time, over 4 years of choosing quiet over honesty. Selling the house didn't cost me something I still had. It gave me something back. There's one more part to this that I want to tell you, because I think it's the part that actually matters. About a month after I moved into the condo, I got a call from Drew. Not a text, a call. He asked if he could come by. I said yes. He drove from Hamilton, which is about an hour, and he showed up with a bag of coffee from a place he knows I like. We sat at my small kitchen table, smaller than the old one, more appropriate for the space, and we talked for about 2 hours. He told me about their situation. They'd found a one-bedroom apartment in Hamilton. It was smaller than they were used to, and expensive, and the adjustment had been real. Tamsin was struggling. Her content business was not what she'd hoped. They were figuring it out. I didn't say I told you so. I don't see the point in that. I told him that I was glad he came. I told him that I want to have a relationship with him, that losing that matters to me more than any of the other things that happened. I told him that I think he's a good man who spent a few years making choices that weren't good, which is a thing that happens to people and doesn't have to define everything after. He got a bit emotional. I got a bit emotional. We are Canadian men in our 60s and 40s respectively, so we expressed this mainly through a lot of looking at our coffees and clearing of throats. He asked if I'd come to Hamilton sometime. I said yes. I haven't been yet, but I'm going to. Probably next month. What I would tell anyone in a situation like mine, anyone who's been letting something go on too long, because the alternative felt like a rupture, is that the rupture you're afraid of is usually smaller than it looks from the far side of avoidance. I spent 4 years not saying what needed to be said because I was afraid of damaging something. What I actually did was let it damage itself slowly, in the dark, where I couldn't see it happening. When my daughter-in-law told me to make myself scarce in my own home, she thought she was pushing me out. She was right, but not in the way she intended. She pushed me out of 4 years of inertia. She pushed me into making a decision I should have made 2 years earlier. I am 67 years old. I live on the 14th floor above a river I can see from my kitchen window. I have a second bedroom where my daughter sleeps when she visits. I have a coffee maker I chose myself. I go to the diner on King Street on Friday mornings, and the owner still asks about my golf game. Maybe this summer I'll actually play.